In a world of AAA games and ultra-realistic graphics, less is oftentimes more in terms of performance in a world where time is as precious as ever and even mid-range PC components cost an arm and a leg. It's becoming hard to find a game that actually runs and isn't a complete time sink. As someone who has almost 100 hours in Final Fantasy XIV, sometimes I just don't want that type of commitment, you know? Sometimes I just want to sit down and play a game for a session or two and have it feel complete. That really shouldn't be a tall ask in 2026. However, it is. The slapification of the video game industry has definitely hit peak levels. And with people lying about what the tools that they use in video game development, it's hard to know if you're actually getting a good deal for your money. And speaking of corporate greed, that is one of the main themes in the game that we're talking about today, which if you've seen the title, is mouthwashing. So you better buckle up, this game is one hell of a trip. I'm Ayasuda and I make videos, more specifically art videos, and like I said previously, I want to get more into review content, and that's pretty much what I want to talk about here. Now when I do reviews, I'm not just focused on gameplay, and while it obviously is very important, I'm not going to focus on that as long as it isn't really super impactful to the art and overall storytelling. Because I want to view video games as a part of art history. A lot of artists worked on projects such as these, so it makes sense to look at it that way, since I'm still mainly an art channel. That being said, I'll likely talk about the main themes of this game in relation to the art and everything else that's going on, so be warned, spoilers are ahead. Also, this game does deal with heavier topics such as addiction and SA, and if those topics are difficult for you, you may want to click off of this video. That being said, I will say that for mouthwashing, the gameplay is pretty simple. There's no flashy animations, no orchestral battle themes, just simple walking simulator. And at first glance, that might be boring, but if you have strong visuals and interesting characters, anything is possible. So, right off the bat, what I immediately noticed about this kooky independent horror game is the low poly graphics. In a world of Silent Hills and Resident Evils, it's nice to have something a little bit more stylized. Video games are an art form, and the sky's the limit with what you can achieve with various game engines. And Mouthwashing proves that sometimes less is more in terms of development. And you don't necessarily need bells or whistles to make a good, compelling game, or super flashy designs in order to keep an audience. Despite the blocky proportions of our main cast, there's a hidden grittiness when it comes to these characters and overall themes in this game. Despite the bright colors, there's something a bit isolating regarding some art in this game from what I noticed. Despite the colorful cast, it makes sense that there's some isolation in this game, considering that it takes place in space. So not only do we have the body horror aspect of mouthwashing, there's also a psychological aspect to it as well. So while this technically isn't an action game, it doesn't take long for the game to throw us into a chaotic situation. The story takes place on a ship called Tulpar, a 5-person transport ship bound for an asteroid. Now what are we doing in outer space? We work for Pony Express, which is essentially Space Amazon. The name Pony Express comes from an actual company that was a mail carrier in the late 19th century. Pretty much it delivered people's mail using horse-mounted riders between Missouri and California. Unironically, horses are also quite important to this story despite it taking place in outer space. The mascot for Pony Express in the game is a horse called Pole, and there's various figurines and posters of him in the game. Now, obviously he's supposed to be a cute horse mascot, but it feels more like Big Brother is watching. And that's certainly no coincidence. Pony Express in-game is supposed to be a stand-in for Amazon, as well as other larger corporations. If you take a closer look at some of these posters in-game, you quickly see that Pony Express isn't exactly the best place to work for. As I, and I'm sure many of you guys know as well, being in an oppressive workplace can do numbers on your own mental health. I'm also sure if you've seen memes on this game, taking responsibility is a major theme in this game. Not just for your own personal actions, but regarding the sense of duty in one's job, and feelings of regret and being stuck in a job that these characters don't exactly like. Failing to take responsibility is going to prove to be quite a challenge for a lot of the characters in this game. which leads to resentment and ultimately regret, which can also turn to even more negative emotions as we see. So essentially, the whole premise of Mouthwashing is the fallout of an accidental crash and how our 5 main characters deal with the consequences. Or not, depending on the circumstances. So we, as the player, get to hop around between the perspectives of 2 characters, Curly and Jimmy. Curly is the original captain of the Tulpar and Jimmy's longtime friend. Curly is the quote-unquote most put-together character in the group, no pun intended. Curly is described as a promising yet ambitious young man, and as such, even though he is the captain of the ship, he does grow tired of his position, wondering if captain is all he'll ever be, and deciding if he even chose the correct career path. This is not exactly a new concept, but a lot of people feel this way. Despite his resentment, he is described to be the most responsible of our group, and despite his negative feelings, he tried not to let that show to the others. Despite his good intentions, his charitability ends up causing problems for the Pony Express crew. His idealistic nature in trying to see the best in people causes him to become passive. And that's at the best case. Other people see him as an enabler to the traumatic events in the game. If bystander effect was a character, it would be Curly in the grand scheme of things. Now, in the making of this particular review, I had to rewatch my VOD several times to make sure I understood everything that was going on. Now, interestingly enough, we do get to play as Curly during certain parts of the game. Now, prior to the crash at the beginning of the game, we don't really get to see Curly a whole lot, even though he's the captain. We only really see the body horror version of Curly, and I can't help but think that's intentional and adds to the note of pacificity that his character does hold. His passive nature transforms after the crash because he's not really in control of his faculties. He didn't exactly take leadership while he was able to be captain, so the choice was made for him, and now he's not able to control anything in his life. I think that's pretty on par with the nature of this game. And that leads us to the second character that we spend the most time playing as in the game. And that is Jimmy. And I am in no way defending Jimmy's actions in the game. If you've played the game, you likely know what I'm talking about. But that doesn't exactly stop him from being an interesting character worth talking about. Jimmy is a foil to Curly. And while Curly is seen as responsible and polite, Jimmy is more bitter, he's spiteful, and in some cases he's pretty manipulative. As we play as him, we start to learn that he's not exactly the most reliable narrator, which makes sense given by how much we're told to take responsibility as we play as him. While we don't exactly know a lot about these characters prior to them working for Pony Express, it is implied that Jimmy had a rough upbringing, so it's not exactly surprising that he is both proud and yet not satisfied with his position as being co-pilot of the Tulpar. It is the most power he's ever had in his life, and I'm pretty sure everyone knows the quote about both power comes with great responsibility, and that's very relevant with Jimmy. He wanted to be the main captain, but he isn't exactly personable with the rest of the crew. And something I didn't realize when I first played the game was that the crash was technically caused by him. Now, I thought that it was an honest mistake, but on further review, I realized that he was trying to, alive himself at the beginning of the game. And I guess that adds to the selfish theme of his character. This was all a means to an end for him. He didn't care about the other crew members on board. Despite the fact that he's technically the protagonist here in the game, he's not exactly a good guy. If anything, he's far from it. Now, to understand the whole gravity of what he's done in the story, we have to go to our third character, which is Anya. Now, if you've been a woman in a male-dominated space or some other minority in another dominated space, I feel like you can really appreciate her character that much more. She was described as being determined and smart, which she sort of has to be in that situation as she's the main medic for the group. If she's not helping the others, she's usually off by herself studying. Now, the reason she's on this ship with the rest of the crew is because she failed to get into medical school, and as such, the only way that she could practice medicine was with the Pony Express. Now again, I'm going to be talking about something that's pretty dark and heavy to get through, but I wanted to give another warning before I jump right into it. In the game, her relationship with Curly and obviously Jimmy is quite mixed. It is implied in the game that Jimmy assaults Anya, and as a result, she is carrying his child. This takes place before the crash even happens at the beginning of the game, and it makes what Jimmy did as far as crashing the ship more obvious in him not taking responsibility for his actions. After the horrendous assault, Anya tells Curly about what happened. He is the one that she confides in the most in the whole crew. Unfortunately, after she tells him what happened, their relationship becomes strained because Curly decides not to really do anything about Jimmy. And because of her assault and subsequent crash that the whole crew goes through, her mental health declines rapidly, which is unfortunately super relatable and understanding. Not only are you trapped in a ship that has limited supplies, you're also on a ship with someone who attacked you. And the one person who you're closest with chooses not to say or do anything to help. Unfortunately, this behavior is quite common in a lot of workspaces. And personal spaces too, if we're being honest, unfortunately. Now this is another interesting dynamic between Curly and Jimmy. A lot of people see Curly as a type of enabler. He knows Jimmy and knows how he can get, which is a direct quote from the game itself. Curly knows Jimmy's rough past and as a result gave him the job on Pony Express. One can assume that Jimmy probably did something back on Earth to warrant him having limited options in terms of his life. One could argue that this was a second chance, another reason for him to keep going. On the other hand, it could be Curly feeling guilty. Maybe he covered up something else Jimmy did in the past that we don't know about. There's also a third option that Curly himself is a victim of Jimmy's tactics, and that goes on well before the start of the actual game. We know this to be true after the crash itself because Curly becomes incapacitated. Now again, I'm not making any excuses for any of the behavior that these characters are exhibiting, but I'm sure a lot of people have struggled cutting someone off that they know is toxic and harmful and hurts people. It can be hard because you want to see the best in people and hope that people can change, but even despite all the guidance and patience in the world, it's not always possible. And sometimes you just need to know when to cut your losses and realize you can't help everyone. Grief and loss are something we all are going to have to deal with in our lives. And seeing that expressed in the different characters is something that this game really does shine on. Even for Anya, the victim in this situation, she even realizes that there is a chance for her rehabilitation for Jimmy. She says, and I quote, "I have to believe our worst moments don't make us monsters, Jim." Even with Curly's lack of action, she still feels responsible for treating him after the crash. Anya is very nurturing. She doesn't want to see him suffer. And in story games like this, I really do enjoy diving deeper into characters' different psyches and reasons for doing things. Even little things about their designs can tell you so much about a character. Now, I haven't exactly talked about the overall art yet in this game, but if you want to see me do more character breakdowns in other games that I've played, don't hesitate to like this video as well as subscribe. I already did a video like this for South of Midnight if you're interested. I definitely think the Art of series is going to be something that is going to be a mainstay for this particular channel. I like talking about the art and cultural relevance in references in games, because again, it's part of art history, and I think it's really important, especially in an area where media literacy is definitely not the greatest anymore. Now, enough shilling, we still have two more characters on the Pony Express that I haven't really talked about, and they're also just as interesting when you dive deeper into their inner thoughts. Next up, we have Daisuke, who is an intern on the Topar. I believe he is the youngest member on the crew. And his Hawaiian-esque shirt is unsurprisingly matching with his optimistic personality. Daisuke did not want to be on the Pony Express, but his parents essentially forced him to become an intern. That being said, he isn't trying to be seen as a slacker, at least that's what his parents said about him, so he tries to work his hardest on the ship especially after the crash. Despite him wanting to be able to prove himself worthy of being with the crew, Jimmy, the sweet gumdrop that he is, tells Daisuke off because he's from a well-off family, claiming that mom and daddy have him covered. Now I, as a former insecure young person, understand how it's like to be perceived by your own co-workers, and because of that, he's also easily manipulated and controlled. To understand Daisuke's part in the story here, we have to introduce the fifth and final character of the Pony Express, and certainly not last nor the least interesting. We have Swansea, and surely I'm pronouncing that right. I'm not exactly sure how you're supposed to say his name, but that's how we're going with in this video. If you guys want to correct me, let me know down in the comments about how you're supposed to pronounce his name. Regardless, he is the GOAT. He's my favorite character out of the 5. The second closest is probably Anya, but I still think Swansea takes it from her, unfortunately, in my view. Swansea is a tall, middle-aged man. He's the oldest in the group. Obviously, he is the foil to Daisuke. He's the grumpy older man who's experiencing regret about his life choices. As if you couldn't tell that regret is a huge theme in this game. Swansea dealt with addiction. He used to be an alcoholic but recovered. He seemed to have it all. He was married and had children, but he was still dissatisfied with his life. Now, I don't know if this is a fan theory or not, but some people believe that he was actually divorced by the time he joins the crew, or if that's just conjecture. There's nothing really in the game that states this, and there's nothing that really proves against it, so I guess that's just open to interpretation. I suppose the other common interpretation is that he's having a midlife crisis. Despite his use of colorful language and grumpy exterior, he sort of sees Daisuke as a bit of a son, which makes sense if he's missing his own children back on Earth. I always like grumpy father-type characters. It's just a sweet spot for me. And certainly not because I have my own family issues. Swansea is also pretty cordial to both Curly and Anya. They have a relationship that's similar to regular co-workers, and they both seem to have a shared mutual respect for each other. That ends when we are talking about Jimmy. Now, it's unclear if Swansea knew what happened to Anya, but we get the impression that he never exactly liked Jimmy to begin with. He sees Jimmy as a selfish wannabe hero and a low-life parasite. After Jimmy is forced to step up after Curly is not able to be captain anymore, Swansea refuses to see him as a real leader. And out of everyone, he's the one who stands up to Jimmy the most in the whole game. Unfortunately though, that doesn't last. 3 months after the crash, Jimmy feigns concern regarding Curly's safety. And unfortunately, since they're stranded in space, they have limited medical supplies and Curly needs more help than they can realistically provide. Unfortunately, Anya locks herself in medical with Curly still inside. And Daisuke, hearing Jimmy's quote-unquote concerns, volunteers himself to go check him out. Unfortunately, to get to medical, he literally has to crawl through the vent, and as a result, he burns and seriously injures himself. Now, one thing about the Tolpar is that it has several cryostasis pods in it, in case an emergency happens like the one we're talking about. Unfortunately, because of the crash, only one of the pods is still working, so technically only one of the crew members can technically be saved. Swansea, being the fatherly type that he is, planned to give the pod to Daisuke as he's the youngest. But unfortunately, since Daisuke is injured from his stunt and trying to crawl in the vents, he realizes he's not going to survive. They don't have the medical stuff necessary to treat him. I think you guys know where this story is going, especially if you've played the game. Out of mercy, Swansea decides it's time for Daisuke to meet his untimely demise and ends the poor boy's suffering. So between being stranded in space and having to end his own adoptive son's life, he slips back into addiction. Now you might be wondering why all 5 of these people are on this ship. What could possibly be so important that they're pretty much risking their lives to deliver? They are looking to deliver a shipment ton of mouthwash. And yeah, I said the title of the game, roll credits. I think this is pretty on par with how a lot of workspaces are these days. They have people breaking their neck, risking their life and health over pretty much meaningless tasks. In my opinion, games like Mouthwashing will age well, especially in the era that we live in, and in the fact that I'm older and I've been working for a few years now. I definitely understand the sentiment that is expressed in this game. So, backing up a little bit, to figure out that the crew was actually just delivering mouthwash, they didn't even know that they were delivering that in the first place. The crew was getting desperate for food and supplies, they only had a limited amount to go, and yeah, everyone was starting to panic. So pretty much everyone had decided it was a good idea to go see what was in the actual cargo hold, and lo and behold, all they found was mouthwash. A ton of it. I guess if you're gonna be sucked into the vacuum of space, at least your breath will smell good. And since, like I said, Swansea has an addiction problem with alcohol, it's what he uses to get drunk. And I'm not a doctor by any means, but it's probably not healthy to regularly consume mouthwash like that. Now that we have a fundamental understanding of the main characters in this game, I can turn my focus to the actual art. And related to that, the developers for this game are actually huge horror fans, especially of classical horror movies. Anya's whole design is based on Shelley Duvall, who played a character in The Shining. Other relevant references in this game are to Alien, Event Horizon, and The Thing. And if we want to get even more technical, Curly's whole post-crash design is based off of Hannibal Lecter. Now, moving on to the actual game art itself, there are several things that subvert mouthwashing from other horror games. Apart from the low poly graphics, it's also quite colorful. From the bright red warning screen to the infinite sunset in the main hall of the Tulpar, this game isn't afraid to take saturation and jack it up to 10. That is also something similar to The Shining itself, as the movie deals with brighter colors. In a horror setting, brighter colors can actually give off a appearance of tension, a dreamlike or almost nightmare scenario. Though I can't imagine that most people that have been stuck on a ship with nothing but mouthwash probably wouldn't be hallucinating as well. The game itself changes in design too, as the occupants of Tolpar are dealing with the ship malfunctioning from being stranded in space. The game mech gets smaller and smaller the more we progress in the game, and adds to an already heavy sense of claustrophobia. As a design nerd, I also can't ignore the heavy symbolism in this game. That includes the toy horse mascot that we see prominently featured throughout the game. I mean, the name of the corporation is the Pony Express. Horses can symbolize the want for independence and passion as well as motivation. Horses can be a vehicle of man's will, which is ironic given how Jimmy imposes his will on Aya and the other crew members of the ship. In some instances, horses can be a symbolism for death, though this is more common in Greek mythology compared to other cultural events. Maybe Pole is not just a cute cartoon horse, maybe it's a guide carrying the souls of our crew to the afterlife. There's also another interpretation of Pole being the symbol of a broken animal used for labor. That is probably the most likely interpretation, but I couldn't help but bring up Greek mythology. For a horror game, it does read a lot like an ancient Greek poem in some instances of the story. The talks of hubris and grief are something that's pretty common in Greek plays. Another interesting part of the symbolism in this game is the mouthwash itself. It refers to itself as being able to kill 99.99% of bacteria, and that it's often representative of the crew of the ship. Now, even just this mouthwash itself is made out of sugar, so it's kind of useless to actually clean bacteria. It also represents the way that Jimmy keeps trying to fix his past mistakes, but is actually making things worse and running from his problems. Both his and Curly's refusal to take responsibility for their actions, or lack thereof, is what leads everyone to their death. There's also the symbolism too that the crew is risking their lives to deliver something that's pretty much useless. The irony of giving your life to corporate greed for pretty much nothing in return. But that's just life in 2026. Some players of the game hypothesize that the light blue color of the mouthwash has some religious connotations to it. The light blue color is representative of the Virgin Mary. In Catholic lore, she's a woman without sin, and most of Anya's design is actually light blue, so maybe she is representative of the Virgin Mary? That would imply that Curly is almost Christ-like in the fact that she has to take care of him. And there's also a scene in the game where there deals with cannibalism, and it does seem a lot like the Last Supper. One could argue that the mouthwash itself represents holy water and cleansing of the soul. Taking responsibility could be confessing your sins before you pass to the afterlife. There's also the fact that the mouthwash itself contains alcohol, and a lot of alcohol consumption is linked to religious hallucinations. So maybe what we see in the game is just a hallucination of all the crew members before they pass away. And there's the fact that in some situations, especially towards the end of the game, it almost looks like Curly is being crucified. Now that I think about it, I wonder if these devs are also Evangelion fans, because there's a lot of similarities between the two. I mean, post-accident Curly, it almost looks like the Bandage EVA 1 unit, which I'm sure is definitely not a coincidence. Evangelion also deals with irresponsible pilots who don't take responsibility. That means Jimmy is actually just Shinji, and Anya is actually Asuka. This might be a bit of a stretch, but it does add credence to the whole idea of a religious theme in mouthwashing. And technically, Pokemon is an in-universe thing that does exist. Each of the characters do have a favorite Pokemon, so it's conceivably possible that Evangelion also exists in this universe. I've seen fans on Reddit say that there's also similarities to Berserk, but I feel like it's a bit more of a stretch. Maybe the assault part could be, but I don't know, they don't really remind me of Guts or Griffith. That being said, I really do enjoy digging deeper into these video game worlds and seeing all the different Easter eggs and stuff that I can find. I want to review more games. I need more recommendations for indie horror games or just indie games in general. If you want to see that type of content, don't hesitate to like this video as well as subscribe. And if anyone has any suggestions, let me know down in the comments of what you want to see me play and analyze. That being said, going back to the gameplay for a second, it isn't flashy, there's no flashy animations or anything of that nature, and it doesn't really have to have those things. Strong characters and strong visuals are all you really need to have a complete game. The game looks great, the visuals are sharp despite their low poly appeal. The game is short, I was able to get through it in one sitting, and it didn't blow up my PC. So I'd say overall, it's definitely a game that I would recommend if you can get past the darker themes, or are just an overall fan of vintage horror. I will say that there's not too many jump scares, which I actually appreciate in horror, because after a while jump scares get old and it's just not exactly entertaining. The philosophical and psychological effects of this game, down to even tiny design details, is something that really scratches my brain. I also appreciate that the game is not super long either. It entertained me more than a lot of the horror movies that came out in the past 5 years. There's so much more that I could say about this game, and the more that I go back and look through my thought, there are more things that I notice about it. If anything, I might actually replay this game again at some point. There are other similar games that I want to take a look at too, so if you're interested in that, then don't hesitate to like this video, as well as subscribe. And I should be out with more videos. I really want to be more consistent with YouTube in 2026. So thank you for your patience, and sorry about the inconsistent uploads. Gonna try to log in and be more consistent on here. So until then, goodbye and take care. Peace.